Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining this session on taking advantage of disruptive technologies, especially the people aspect. With me today, I have James McDermott, the Executive Chairman of Achieve Intelligence, Eileen Ching, Senior Director in Biostatistics at GSK, and Matt Jones, the CEO of Veramed. Thanks for joining me today, guys. Okay. So we're all in the pharmaceutical industry. This is part of the pharma track at Rev. And specifically, we're looking at the pharmaceutical industry itself. James, we've all been in the industry for many years. Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about our industry that's different than other industries?
Sure. I think it feels like we're in a chat show here, so I'll start with an anecdote, because that's probably the best way to go. So in the UK, we have a number of universities that do master's degree in medical statistics, and without knowing it, I went into that. Without knowing I was going to end up in the pharmaceutical industry, I went that way. And I went to the University of Leicester and got an MSc in medical statistics. I then was looking around for a career, and I wasn't actually considering the pharmaceutical industry at all. I knew nothing about it. And a friend of mine said, why don't you apply to this company called the Clinical Research Foundation to be a CRA? What's that? Clinical Research Associate. Well, that sounds interesting. So I went and did the interview, and the lady who was actually, that company eventually got bought by Quintiles, or Innovex, Quintiles, and became IQVIA. And Jane Winter was the woman that interviewed me at the time, and she's still in the industry now. And she finished the interview, and she said, well, I think you'd make a really good CRA, but wouldn't you rather be a statistician? And I said, oh, is that a job? I didn't realize you could do that in the industry. So I got a job in, it was the Clinical Research Foundation, this little company that became part of this group. And I went in to do my first job. So this is in '92, my first task. And I was given a protocol and a list of potential protocol violations. And I was given a stack of case report forms and a red pen and a green pen. And I had to sit there and go through and mark where everything was outside of the protocol violators. And I sat there and I thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. Why am I doing this? Because I'd done a computer sciences degree as well. So I said, look, we've got computers here. Why don't you use the computers to do this? And their response was, well, that's a good idea. I'll make it happen. So at that time, in the early 90s, and remember this, the 21 CFR Part 11 was late 90s, early noughties that came in. So even then, like 9 years before then, not everybody was using computers. It was still case report form. So it was a very different landscape. But just ask yourself how different it is today from that. So one thing I'd like to just, have you all heard of Moore's Law? Right, the power of computers increases exponentially. Have you seen Raymond Kurzweil's extrapolation to technology? It sort of takes it back to writing, the wheel, the car, the plane, and it follows the same sort of trajectory. And there's a bit of a discussion about how these extra advances create rapidly increasing advances. They're truly synergistic. The word's misused occasionally, but this is the right use of the word. And I think that's happening in our industry as well. We've got these synergistic changes happening. And so, for example, cloud computing becomes available, and suddenly you're able to collaborate with people around the world, and other things happen. So it makes it much more. So what that means is the landscape that we're working in is a rapidly changing and accelerating changing environment, which we can all feel. So what we need to do is we need to embrace change and embrace methodologies that allow you to affect change appropriately. That brings me to the next part about the industry, is we don't like change. I mean, and there's a good reason for that. We're regulated, and we hold that dear to our heart. I mean, in Europe, we talk about the thalidomide disaster. You don't talk about it here in the US so much, because one woman was inspirational and stopped that happening. You had a regulatory authority that had teeth and power. So it's important that we listen to that, so that we've got these two competing things happening. But we have to understand the purpose of those regulations and realize that innovation and change is coming and is needed. Also, I have ADHD, I'm not neurotypical, and I've forgotten the question.
What makes our industry different? And I
Right,
think you
yes.
answered that.
Good.
We're impacting human lives. We need regulation. So you talked a little bit about your history and how things have changed or not changed a lot. You talked about how everything was paper-based when you first joined.
Sure. Could I add one more difference I had
sure.
thought about before, which is the motivation in utilities, finance, banking. The motivation in those industries is driven by the fact that they've had to be cost conscious. So if you go online to buy an insurance policy, they're broadly the same. They provide the same thing, and really, if one's $5 cheaper than the other one, you're going to go for the cheaper one. So in the insurance industry, they have to work very hard to be efficient. In our industry, if you're 1 day late for submission, it can cost the company, what, $1 million or whatever the number is. It costs a lot of money. So we throw money at getting it finished. So much so that we don't actually work to improve things. We have to do that as a side issue. Our main job is cranking the handle to do the thing that we do every day the same. And there's resistance to do that. And I think that's changing. So I don't think we've got less money, but we've got more demand on resources. How many people are struggling to hire data scientists and data engineers? I know we are, struggling to keep them, and we just keep adding more requirements in there. So there's another difference between our industry. I think we're moving to where those other industries have been, so we should start listening to them as well. I hope there's some people in the audience from those industries.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
So speaking of what makes us unique, so I started in the pharma industry also many years ago when we used to collect data on paper case report forms, right? And I started out as a statistical programmer, right? Basically analyzing data collected from human clinical trials. And back then we produced paper-based outputs, right? Tables listing figures, etc., that display the results. And then because of my background in computer science, and I moved away into more the IT tech field. And then a few years back, I came back, ago, I came back right before COVID. So that was, so I was away from this clinical development space for about, 20 years. And I came back and looked at the outputs that the programmers were still producing. They looked almost exactly like what I did 20 years ago. So that tells you something about our industry.
Absolutely.
It just doesn't change very quickly. But there have been trends over those years. I also have spent 20 years, or a little bit over 20 years in the industry as well. Actually, I think I welcomed everyone. I introduced everyone. I didn't introduce myself. And I'm actually the global head of healthcare and life sciences at Domino. And prior to Domino, I actually worked with Eileen at GSK. So we have been in the industry for a very long period of time. And Matt, I'm gonna actually ask you a question because you as well have been in the industry as a CRO, leading a CRO. For many years. What trends have you seen? I mean, have you seen changes happening, or have there been trends of interest in something where there's been a resistance to change, and maybe that has held the industry back? What's your experience?
Sure. So I've been in the industry 20 odd years. I've seen some things come and go. Actually, things today are very similar to the way they were done 20 years ago, and there are people doing the same job, writing the same programs that they were. I mean, just for, how many people here actually work in the pharmaceutical industry? Can I have a quick show of hands?
Wow.
Who doesn't but has an interest in the pharmaceutical industry? A few others. Is there anyone else? No, good. Oh, we'll see. Yeah, your room's next door. But no, things are pretty similar. I think one thing about our industry is that we do have a very long value chain. It's not a single transaction for the purchase of an insurance product or something. There are lots and lots and lots of steps that kind of dovetail together, go back to back. And the drug programs that are running, the development of those span over a long period of time as well. So when they're planned out, they will be running for one trial can run for several years. And once you're committed to a particular technology or a particular way of doing things, it's quite difficult to change course. And when you're changing course, because of the reasons that James has said, that we do have a culture of risk aversion for good reason. The risks of getting, or the consequences of getting things wrong are large. So because of that, it takes quite a lot for us to change, because we want to make sure that when we are changing, that the risks are well managed.
Yeah.
But there is a difference. I think I think part of it, in terms of what is changing now and what I'm seeing, is actually probably sparked by COVID, actually. So with the pandemic, there was this huge rush for everyone to collaborate in ways that they didn't collaborate before. And if you look at our industry, up until probably 5 minutes ago, everyone was using, and still most of them are to this day, one particular programming language, proprietary language. And with a mindset of doing proprietary things, there's a big need for data privacy, and there's a lot of intellectual property attached to data and people's health records at the end of the day. So actually pharmaceutical companies operating in our space have been working in their little bubble doing the same things. And there's 1,000 different versions of the same sets of macros that are being created by lots of different people doing things in very similar ways. Lots of different flavors of the same thing. But when COVID came along, the industry kind of changed a little bit, which was actually people started collaborating a lot more. Pharmaceutical companies got together and said, well, let's work together. Let's solve some of these challenges together. Regulators were approving drugs and collaborating with industry way more than they ever had before, and expediting review and approval. And that kind of sparked, I think, a slightly different way of thinking. And then I think there's a session tomorrow morning around open source. So there was a kind of presumption in the industry that you could only use one programming language for everything and submit all your data in one particular way for so many years. And that was probably not true, but it was just generally accepted. And I think last year there was a test submission in R, Thomas will know. I think it was last year, wasn't it? Was it last year? Yeah, last year. And so that's kind of probably the first time that actually the industry has said, well, hold on a minute, it doesn't have to be one language. There are other options. And some of the other things in the industry that are changing around submission formats and things like that will actually facilitate new ways of working. So I think what I'm seeing now is we've got this slight change in mindset. So more of a willingness to collaborate, more of a willingness to think cross-industry. And at the same time, we've got tough economic conditions. So drugs are getting more expensive to develop, and they're harder to find decent molecules, which is actually putting pressures to use more technology and work more efficiently. So I think the combination of those factors, and obviously the explosion of data, things like real-world data and digital data, just means that actually now is probably the time for technology. I think now is the time to really kind of look at the ways that we're doing things and the technologies that we're adopting, and make the most of those to push the industry forward. Which is a bit scary for me, because I've done it the same way for 20 years, but now I've got to change.
And now you have to lead a large organization in that way. Is this ultimately, we know progress is all about technology, people, and processes, and people is a huge component of that. Eileen, how do you see the changes that are imminent today in our industry impacting people?
Yeah, so as I was saying, I started out as a SAS programmer, actually, so SAS was king back then, right? Now with more pioneers, or I guess they were pioneers a couple of years ago, but now they're, more and more folks are embracing the non-traditional tools and languages, etc., right, in our industry. So it's sort of becoming the norm versus the novel, if you will, right? So that also means that the folks who are in the industry, like me, right, people around me who've been in the industry for a while, need to think about learning new tools, new languages, etc., new ways of working. So at GSK, we are definitely embarking on this journey to upskill the folks, so there are that they can that multilingual, I guess, is the term here, right? They can actually use the right tool for the job versus being tied down to a single tool set. So that's something that we're definitely doing, very actively doing right now at GSK. And part of that is also giving them the platform where they can actually take that journey in hopefully a very seamless, less painful way. So we're putting together infrastructure platforms like Domino, right, to enable them to be able to program in multiple languages to ease that burden, right, lower lower the roadblocks, if you will. And part of that is also having a framework, having the confidence in the new tool. James talked about regulations, right? Compliance, a huge thing in our industry, because anything that we do, a mistake could cost lives here, right? So it's really important that we maintain that quality, making sure that our software is validated and qualified and validated. And part of that is making sure that these new open source tools and technologies, the non-traditional ways of working, can still meet those high standards.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that there are certain things that cannot change, which is meeting regulations, and we need to be risk averse in the sense that we're dealing with human lives, and we want to be able to be confident in the decisions that we make and the medicines and treatments that we're rolling out to the public. So having the technology in place, and now Domino is that type of technology. It provides that level of control, but also the flexibility to be able to progress and use the tools and the right tool for the job and access the data that you need. When it comes to people who've been working, who've had those guardrails in place, how is it? There's definitely people who are at the forefront of change, who want to be the first, who are really excited about new technology and just want to make it work. There's people who, will just basically follow along. They'll learn if you tell them to. They will do what you want. But then there's people who are just so attached to the way that they were doing things. And I often think about, is it because they're afraid that the value that they're adding within the framework of their job, is that what they're afraid of? Or what is it that's keeping those people from progressing? And what do you do? How do you meet that challenge?
So we've learned so many lessons in terms of those challenges and how to overcome those challenges. Obviously, there's no magic bullet here, right? We're all human beings. We're all individuals. People think differently. We have different mental models. We have different motivations. Why do we want to embrace something new versus resisting something new? So right now, I'm leading this large program at GSK, which is delivering a brand new modern platform for us to do the regulated reporting and submission work. And for many of us, that is a huge change, as you just said there, Caroline, right? We currently, we have this very ingrained way of working. It's been there for 20 years, right? Very restricted, very prescribed. Sometimes you don't even have to know how to program, actually, to go through that process and still get the output, right? Without even thinking. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean, right? Whereas we're moving folks into this more modern platform where you can actually use your intellectual power, right, to really derive insight from the data. So it's a very different way of working. It's not just the mindset, but that's actually really important, obviously, but also skills, technical skills. In a way, I feel like the mindset, I'm sure many of you would agree with me, is probably harder to change than learning a new technical skill, right? So one of the things that we did was making it very clear that this is a change, that people will need to learn something new, but then also helping them understand the reason for why this change is important, both for the business, for GSK as a company, as well as for them individuals as well, right? Because obviously, for the most part, people want to, derive joy in their work. They want to be happy. They want to feel that they're growing, right? That they're developing as professionals, etc. So having that clarity, painting that picture so it resonates with them, I think is really important. And then also, resistance to change, it's normal, it's natural, right? A lot of times when we going into a change program, we think that, we should expect everyone gung-ho, let's do it kind of thing, and when you detect resistance, somehow it's failure, we failed, right? So that's something we learned, to not have that kind of mindset, that it's actually normal, and to have that empathy and actually try to understand the folks in terms of why are they resisting, right? Is it not enough time to learn? Is it the critical milestones, the deadlines are making them more stressed about learning something new, right? Or is it lack of support? That's important too, right? When you go through this type of change, you want folks to make sure to know that they have that safety net, that they have a robust support structure around them. So all of those things is to understand their needs and then be able to implement measures, if you will, in your change program to address those needs. I think that's really important too.
So James, you've actually worked with helping companies in order to undergo change.
Changes, yeah, of
What
I think that's
you
probably the primary one that I was touching on there, which is in the change management world, there's quite a famous video called "Who Stole My Cheese?"
Yeah,
You've probably all seen it. And this is, in short, it's a maze. You go into the maze each day, the cheese is where you expect it, you get the cheese, you go home, and everything's fine. And one day you go in and the cheese is missing. Some people keep trying to dig for the cheese in the same place. And some people go into the maze and try and find some more cheese. And we need to encourage people to be a second sort. So this is one of the motivations. There is a type of person that's resistant to change. I think there is another reason for it as well, which is, and it's probably a misunderstanding. If you think about why we have standard operating procedures and quality manuals, they're not audited to tell you that they're good or bad. You just have to have them and follow them. They never look at what's in them, because the regulatory authorities do not tell you what to do. So we've got this belief that they've told us that we need to do it this way. No, they're not. They're telling us that we need to do the electronic signatures, or all of the specific things that you need to do that are there, but you just have to have policies in place for those and following them. So there's this kind of feeling that the FDA say that we must do this, but they don't. The FDA, the reviewers particularly, of course in America you're probably more familiar than people in Europe, but the reviewers have to be independent. They will do what they want to do. They will be not told what they need to do, because you need them to be finding things that are wrong. But the centralized Office of Computational Sciences is trying to standardize things and is engaging with the industry. In the early 2000s, I was quite frustrated when I founded a CRO in the late 90s, and then in the early 2000s I was frustrated that everything was siloed in our industry. I had to go to data management conference to speak to data managers, a stats conference to speak to statisticians, and they were also geographically siloed. We didn't have people together. So with my client at the time, Stephen Bamford, we founded Fuse, a professional society that was to encompass all of those areas, to bring all of those people together, trying to break down those silos. I mean, we're a good few years on now, but we haven't kind of broken those down. But one of the things that happened, I think it was 2012, was we were invited by the FDA to start the Computational Science Symposium, which is the FDA engaging with us. And actually, I learned so much from that, I had that same mantra, we must do it this way. So I think there are the crowd that are, who stole my cheese, I want my cheese. But there's also this other crowd that are, well, we're told that we can't do that, we must follow these rules. And I think we should challenge that.
You know what I hear, actually, in hearing you speak, and you speak about regulators, and we're thinking about people who are resistant to change for various reasons.
I guess Joe Biden's more important than us.
Thank you.
What was I thinking?
Something about Joe Biden.
Okay, resistance to change. Okay, I was thinking, and the FDA and the whole relationship between pharmaceutical companies, each other, the FDA, the public, their organizations internally. There's this sense of, is there fear that holds people back from innovation or from changing, even accelerating? Is it fear of failure, fear of being audited? It seems like there's a lot of fear that then creates perhaps preconceptions or misconceptions and expectations that the people put on themselves, that constrains them, doesn't allow them to actually progress. What do you think?
So I'll just jump in with that, because I think I do mentoring for entrepreneurs that are coming out through business schools and things. And the single the single aspect that stops people making any progress in their personal life or career or anything is fear of failure. We have to embrace failure. Embrace it, know that it's there. And I have a successful business. I've got a number of unsuccessful businesses. So you've got to have a go. And we can focus the light on the successful ones, that's really good. But getting something wrong isn't bad.
No.
So
as long as you learn from that failure.
So it is about, I guess, a little bit, I mean, even personally speaking, something that I've learned recently is reframing failure. Is that rather than being afraid of failure, failure is an opportunity to learn and to do something better next time. So it's actually part of progress. It's not a bad thing.
Right. And also, so on our program, we're using Agile framework for delivery. And part of that is also getting that feedback, that constant feedback from users, right? Again, when you get negative feedback, it's not a bad thing. It's not failure. You use that to make your product, the next version, better, right? So that's something that we've learned over the years of the program.
So when you talk about, Matt, I'm going to ask you this question. You're the CEO of a CRO. You're bound to deadlines. You have a workforce that needs to deliver. That is your business. If you're thinking about upskilling your workforce or changing the way they do certain things or introducing new ways of working, how do you ensure that your workforce is going to be able to deliver for you, for your business, and at the same time progress?
It's a really good question. We have kind of the BAU, business as usual, so the work that's in progress. And actually for that, we probably can't touch it because it has to get done, it has to be right. But there are a few things that we think about to try and enable a culture of change and progress. Because the other thing I'm mindful of is, we've got a team of 350 statisticians, programmers, and some data scientists. And what I'm conscious of is we need to have a workforce that's good for today, but also good for tomorrow. So what's that going to look like? So for me, I think about kind of workforce planning and just, it's a bet, but I have to think about what skills we're going to need in the future and try and train those into the team now. So starting to get people to adopt those kinds of things. Just as an example of that, we run a graduate training program, so we recruit a number of graduates every year, and it always used to be a lot of kind of culture stuff because we're quite a employee value proposition driven company. A lot of culture stuff, a lot of stuff about the pharmaceutical industry and domain knowledge, but also SAS, because it was always SAS programming training. We saw R coming as a second language. So we developed a graduate training program in R. Great. So we got 2 now, right? So that's brilliant. But actually, the year that we developed it, we didn't run it. And we didn't run it because we didn't have the demand for it at that time. So the kind of, for me, in terms of, part of it as a service provider is thinking about what we're going to need and trying to predict that, and therefore trying to train the right skills into the team. One of the other things is around a kind of culture of change and getting people to think about technology in a positive way, but also in a safe way as well. So we established, well, Stuart's over there, but Stuart's team a couple of years ago, which is kind of like a tech standards automation efficiency group with the sole purpose of bringing optimal ways of doing the work that we need to do into practice within the organisation. No billable responsibilities, although Stuart's actually picked up a few projects since, but in a way of kind of being a support mechanism for the business and encouraging the use of new techniques, new technologies, etc. But in parallel to that, giving people the opportunity to try stuff out. So we do things like hackathons, which are great, nice safe space to try things out. People are allowed some time to do side projects. So there are various kind of industry projects that people can contribute to, or some tech initiatives that we've got as well. So it's kind of, in terms of how do we overcome that resistance to change? I think it's by establishing a culture where people can see the value of what that change is going to bring. And for us as a business, it's been really mindful that,
and reward and recognition as well, I would think, right? When you see the right behavior. So again, on our program, for those early adopters who have really helped us to refine the product, we do recognize them, we appreciate them, and that is made pretty, publicly to try to promote that kind of behavior. I think that's important as well.
I mean, knowledge sharing as well. So we do an all-staff meeting every couple of weeks, and in that there's a segment where we invite people to come and tell the rest of the company about the projects that they've been doing. And we do lunch and learns, and we do journal clubs and things like that. So all of this stuff comes together so that people actually think, I want to be part of that. If I'm not part of that, I'll probably be left behind.
So I have a question for actually both of you, whoever wants to answer first.
Eileen.
Good.
Embrace your fear, man.
Okay, me.
Consider that you make a decision not to change, not to invest in the change, and just allow status quo to go on. What would be the impact of that?
I've got an answer for this.
Go ahead, you go ahead with that.
So I was watching a webinar last week. It was on ChatGPT. A lot of buzz around ChatGPT, shiny new toy, pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree.
But it was about an integration with OpenAI, an OpenAI prompt with DataCamp. So DataCamp being somewhere you can learn about coding, etc. And the example was a programmer was kind of saying, right, this is how I'm going to do this analysis using Python, and I'm going to do it. It was quite a simple analysis. Do this, and then I want to draw a graph, and I'm going to use Plotly because that's the package I want to use, and then I want to do some other stuff. And they did it, and it all went fine, but they kind of made a few human errors. So they'd put a filter on one of their data frames or something, and then forgot to use that updated object in the next stage, which is a classic human error. I mean, everyone does that who codes. And then he demonstrated how he could use an OpenAI prompt to perform exactly the same analysis. You do me this first kind of analysis, and it was like, yeah, that one popped out nice and easy, the code was perfect, and it's all done in 30 seconds rather than 3 minutes. Then let's have the plot come out, and it was using a different package, and it looked ugly, and it's like, oh, that's not quite what I want. Can you use Plotly, please? Well, I don't think they said please. I don't think you have to say please. You're on ChatGPT. I'm too British. I'll probably say please, thank you. But, we can get anything better out of the back end. Can you use Plotly? And it replotted Plotly really, really quickly. Perfect. And my takeaway from that was, actually, if we don't change, I think a lot of traditional programmers in the pharmaceutical industry regard their value as their ability to produce simple code and produce the same code, simple queries, etc., time after time after time. I think in time, generative AI will replace the need for creating simple code by individuals, and the skills will transition into complex problem solving, and that kind of intuitive thing about how you bring the different elements of technology together. So I think if we don't change, then in a few years' time, we'll have a workforce that's largely redundant because there won't be a need for their skills anymore. But that's doom and gloom. It's the pharmaceutical industry. We'll probably be fine.
It'll take us a while to get there.
It'll take us a while. What do you think, Eileen?
Well, I tend to agree with you on that. I think right now a lot of what in terms of the overall process hasn't really changed, right? The submission process and how we run clinical trials. So the challenge is more about how do we make it faster, cheaper, et cetera, in a transformative way versus sort of incremental changes that we've been doing for the last 20, 30 years since we've been in industry, right? So it's more about that leapfrogging versus these little incremental change year over year. And part of it is a lot of automation stuff that we do, which in my mind should free up the capacity for our workforce. Right now, we got more work than people can do, I mean, for sure, right? So it's about freeing that capacity, and then along with the upskilling of the workforce, they can really, use their brain power, right, and use newly gained skills on something that's more complex. And again, be able to derive insight from data much faster. Again, that's all part of the clinical, shortening the cycle for the clinical development.
Yeah, I'd completely agree.
So I was at an event for placement students the other day, and it struck me that actually the change is happening anyway, because they're coming into the industry. There were a few of their colleagues that were there for 2 or 3 years. That change is happening. And what was fascinating was the slightly older people. Do you know the phrase, if you got a hammer, everything becomes a nail?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I could hear this all the time. I won't say the SAS, well, I just did. But it was just constantly. But the new people in the industry didn't want to know about that because they know other technology, they know other tools. They wanted to know, are you banging a nail in, or are you putting a screw in, or unbolting something? What's the task that you're doing? And then they had, in their minds, they had other tools that they could put to that, whereas we've all gone, oh, let's bang that in, that'll work. So I think that change is coming because they're being taught more in data science degrees. They're being taught more.
We've certainly seen that through our
skills.
graduate training programs. Graduates are coming in with multilingual skills already, and actually problem-solving skills, thinking, what's the right tool for the job at hand. So there is a natural progression.
So I think we have a few minutes left. I just want to open it up to the audience. Does anybody have any questions for anybody on the panel? Do we have a mic that we can run to that, or?
It's coming.
Thank you. Thanks.
That's it, time up.
So I think it was Matt was mentioning that you've got hundreds of statisticians. I'm wondering, when you're trying to change processes or have big organizational change, is it better, or when's it better to try and change it with everyone at once, and when's it better to start with a few people and build it up gradually?
Really good question. I actually, you've probably got a better answer than I have, but we'll keep doing this. With it being the pharmaceutical industry, we like to test everything first. So it tends to be, let's have an idea, let's put together a proof of concept, let's then do a pilot, and then once we've done the pilot, let's do a rollout. So I think you have time. I think there is lead time to be able to do it. So I would say start relatively small, prove that you can do it. Once you prove the concept, then start your training program well ahead, and then do a kind of planned migrational transition. That's what I'd suggest.
Yeah, and similarly, I think we do want to try things out first, right? We want to fail small. I think that's what they say, fail small. But then when we do have, if it's a really major change, obviously we do want to have a larger program where everyone is part of it. So it's kind of a combination, but you do start out with something that's more concrete that proves that this is actually successful, that can be scaled, and then you go with the scale up.
There's also a process in organizational change management that allows you to engage stakeholders initially, get people on board, identify change champions that can then take that forward. That's right. And there's a whole methodology there that's existed. And we are adopting it in our industry now, but it's not been as prevalent in clinical operations as it has been in other areas. But change management is important. I know you do it at GSK. And it's important
actually, you just remind me of something. So in our industry, we love trainings, right? Lots of training programs, processes, tools, and everything. So we're good at rolling out trainings. But training is not, I don't want to say it's not practical, but you need to actually have practical usage, application, or we learn, right, to be really competent. So one thing that we have done at GSK is, so we have these project-based teams that do work on actual drug projects, right, vaccine projects. And then my team is actually more of an enabling team. So I have a group of people who work with tech partners to build these tools and platforms to enable those drug project-facing teams, right? What we do is we have this secondment kind of program where we take folks from the drug project teams into our team, and they actually learn a new skill and then actually use that skill on the real development effort, you know what I mean? And then they can then learn that, bring that back, and share that with their fellow members on that team, and be able to sort of organically kind of grow that skill set as well.
I like that idea. Does it work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great.
Any other questions? Oh, over here, up here. Thanks.
So I've been trying to think about how to phrase this question. So this session was about change management and the people aspect of it, right? Well, I think we can all agree that leaders are people too.
Yes.
And while you're going through this change management, eventually things will change. And as leaders, as you become a leader, you partially become a leader because you're an expert in a field, in a thing. As this change is occurring, your expertise in that same area, sometimes it changes. You don't know it as well as you used to do. You're no longer the programmer, you're no longer the person actually doing it. How do you deal with situations where people are now coming to you with questions? How do I do this? What decisions should we be making? But it's now no longer the same thing that you're an expert on. How does a leader deal with that?
That's a really good question.
Sorry to difficult
That's a
question.
really good question. So I think making leadership decisions isn't about understanding what the task is. Yes, you have to have an understanding of that, but you need to be able to broaden it out and make sure you're answering the right question. So, and being, also one point about becoming a leader, it's not necessarily because you're good at your job.
You're making an assumption.
Yeah, I think leadership, again, this is sort of, is more about cultivating followers. Followership is more important. And in followership, then you get people that trust you, and you can trust them because you've got people that are part of your group. So, yeah, hopefully that sort of gives you a hint.
I mean, I think
it's a big question, though.
For me, I think the objective hasn't changed. You know, what we're trying to do, we're just trying to do it a different way. So that bit of the knowledge and some of the domain knowledge and stuff is obviously still there. I'm quite sad that I'm no longer working on projects because I do love it. But there you go. But what I tend to do is I meet with Stuart every week and we talk for an hour. It's not always about tech and tech decisions and things like that. But for me, it's about having the right set of trusted advisors that I can speak to on a regular basis and kind of get the feel of the organisation. And then when decision points do come up, I feel informed enough to kind of delineate whether it's a really good idea, a really bad idea, or maybe it's just a shiny toy that people are excited about today.
Yeah, just one thing to add. So I don't consider myself an expert in anything, actually. It's more of a jack of all trades and expert in none. So similar to what James and Matt said, is to really surround yourself with experts, right? In terms of, and if you're the leader of that team, as a leader, help develop those folks. Even if they're not experts right now, develop them into the experts that you need them to be. Yeah, so I think that's really important. And then also stakeholders too. Not just, a lot of decisions have impact wider than your immediate team, organizationally across departments, etc. Is making sure that you also know who those key stakeholders are and involve them into that decision making as well.
Great. You have more questions? No? But
Thank you. Great discussion. From a change perspective, you talked about a lot of the different stakeholders. What about the receivers of the information, like the medical writers and the medics? Is the platform enabling better collaboration of that type, or is this a challenge as well from your perspective?
So I think that they are part of the stakeholder set, and you do it as part of this methodology I was talking about. You identify different quadrants. And these are people that need to be kept informed about the changes, they need to feed into that. And then you have a communication plan. But again, it's not simple. You choose the target, you choose the message, and you choose the medium that you're delivering that message with, and all these decisions need to be made and thought through as part of this change process. And if you don't do that, you have change mismanagement, and you end up having a chaotic change.
Yeah, and tailoring those
so
messages.
they are stakeholders.
Yeah, and tailoring those messages to different groups as well, because we have one of the products that we're rolling out is actually it's a change for the Biostatistics group themselves, but then also it's a change to their users, their customers, in this case, medical writers, right? So the messaging we have to them is different from what they need to then communicate to the medical writers in terms of the benefits and how those roles are impacted differently, is to really understand the impact and be able to tailor your messages to those.
And is it starting to have a better aspect from a collaboration perspective, from programmer to statistician to medical writer? Is that enabling that through the platform, do you think?
I think so, yeah, I think so. I think part of the program is to be able to make sure that we have a single environment where the producers can produce the results, and then we allow the consumers to be able to view and consume the results in a seamless fashion as well, right? So, yeah. It's all part of that end-to-end process, essentially. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we are we at time? Yeah? I think we go until 2:15.
I think we're over.
Yeah, we have
over time.
We're a little bit over.
Yeah.
So yeah, I see other people coming in. So thank you very much. Thanks to our panelists. Really appreciate it.